The insult struck harder than the wind. "You lied about your age, Abigail," Rollins said, loud enough for the entire train platform to hear. Her voice sliced through the high desert air like a whip, sharp, unflinching. "You're no 26. You're a dried-up spinster with city dust on your hems." Clara Whitfield stood rooted in place, her boots planted on warped wooden boards that creaked beneath her like they might snap. All of Quemato had turned out for the spectacle. Half the town was here, faces squinting against the New Mexico sun, eyes hungry for humiliation. No one spoke, no one stepped in. They just watched. Abigail continued, her gloved hand resting delicately on the arm of her pale, sweating son. "My Matthew deserves a young wife, fertile one, not some threadbare seamstress, with nothing left but lies and wrinkles." Clara didn't flinch, not outwardly, but something inside her cracked. Something she hadn't even realized was fragile. Her carpetbag, the one she had carried from Philadelphia to Kansas City to Fort Worth to this godforsaken train stop, slipped slightly in her grasp. Her spine remained straight as her mother taught her. "When they come for your dignity, don't. Hand it over. Make them take it." "I came in good faith," Clara said quietly. Her voice did not shake, though her breath did. "I sold everything I had to get here." "And that's not my problem," Abigail said, her lips curled in polite contempt. "A woman like you should have known her place." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Clara couldn't tell if it was sympathy, scorn, or satisfaction. Her cheeks burned from more than just the sun. Heat pooled behind her eyes, but she would not cry here. Not for these people. Matthew Rollins shifted, his gaze flickering. Between his mother and Clara, like a boy watching a barn fire, he helped start, but now regrets. "Maybe we could know," Abigail cut in. "We don't make exceptions for liars." With that, she turned. Matthew followed like a ghost, tethered to a spine that was not his own. They walked away, slow and deliberate, through the crowd that parted like judgment, and Clara Whitfield stood alone. The silence that followed felt louder than the accusation itself. 1,000 thoughts fought to rise in her head, but all she could do was blink. The money for a return ticket was gone. Every piece of her former life, her rented room above the butcher's shop, her mother's last dress, the silver hairpin she pawned, had been traded for this. One shot, one lie, one train ride west. A lie about her age. Just for years. She turned toward the luggage car, feet moving out of instinct, eyes stinging from dust or shame. She wasn't sure. No one moved to help her. No one looked directly at her. Not the woman in the powder blue bonnet whispering. Behind her fan, not the child tugging at his father's coat, asking, "Why is the lady crying?" She wasn't crying, not yet. Behind the freight car, the desert wind shifted. Clara paused, her hand still gripping the worn handle of her bag. It was there, in the shadow of iron and steam, that she saw him. A man stood alone, half hidden, arms crossed, hat pulled low. Tall, broad-shouldered,
Dust covered from boots to beard.
His face was lined like old paper, but his eyes gray and steady watched her with something that wasn't pity. Recognition, maybe, or memory. They locked eyes for one suspended breath. Then he spoke. "If you've got nowhere else to be," he said, voice gravel and molasses, "then maybe you belong out where no one looks." The wind kicked up. Somewhere behind her, a train whistle screamed. Clara turned fully toward the man in the dust. Not toward safety. Not toward comfort, but toward something else. Possibility. "If you've got nowhere else to be," the man in the shadows said, "then maybe you belong out where no one looks." Clara didn't answer him right away. She stood still, chest rising and falling, the heat from the Quemato sun sliding down the back of her neck like shame in liquid form. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her carpetbag, the only thing that hadn't abandoned her. The man didn't move either. He waited, no sales pitch, no smile, no empty. Offers, just a quiet, grounded stillness. Clara stepped off the freight platform slowly, as if the boards beneath her might shatter with one wrong word. Her boots hit red soil. Dust kicked up around her hem. It clung to her like memory. When she reached him, they stood face to face. He was taller up close by nearly a head. He wore a worn flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, revealing forearms carved by work, not vanity. His skin was sun-dark, weathered, with the faint high-bone trace of Navajo ancestry. His jaw was half obscured by a beard that needed trimming, but his eyes, clear, quiet, unreadable, never left hers. She straightened. "You were watching. Not proud of it," he said. Clara waited for the judgment, the scolding, the unasked questions, but the man just looked at her like she was a tree the lightning missed. "What's your name?" she asked. "Elias," he said. "Elias Yazzie." "Elias Yazzie," she blinked. Not from town, are you?" "No," he said, "and I'd like to keep it that way." His voice was slow, but not simple. Like someone who chose words the way others chose bullets carefully, and only when necessary. Elias gestured vaguely toward the west. "My place is about 10 miles out, a little broken, a little quiet. No one will bother you there." "Why would you offer that?" she asked, her voice suddenly sharp, too loud. "You don't even know me." His reply was plain. Nobody else did. The words hit like a bell rung from the inside. Clara looked down, breathing in the moment. If she'd had anything left in her chest, maybe she'd have cried. But she was dry as the dust around her. "I'm not asking for pity," she said, not offering any, "and I won't be kept." "You won't be," Elias said. "They're us work. A house that needs hands. You work, you eat. You don't owe me anything more than that." Clara searched his face. Nothing in his expression suggested deception, just tiredness, just honesty. Just a man who understood what it meant to be left standing alone in a place you don't belong. "I lied about my age," she admitted softly. "I figured," he said. "You're not upset? You lied for hope?" "I've seen worse sins." Pause stretched between them, not awkward, just wide. Like they were both standing at the edge of something they didn't know the depth of. Finally, Elias shifted his weight, wincing slightly. Clara noticed the way he leaned on his left leg. Old injury, maybe more. "Where's a wagon?" he said. "Round front." Clara glanced over her shoulder, where the crowd was already breaking apart. Faces turned away now, content their gossip was full and fresh. Her name would be spoken over sewing tables and saloon counters by sundown. "Let them talk," she turned back. All right, I'll go with you." Elias gave a slow nod, no smile, no drama, just acceptance. Then he moved toward the alley beside the station, limping faintly. Clara followed without a word. They walked in silence around to the front, where a battered wagon waited under the full burn of late afternoon sun. To draft horses, lean but solid, stood waiting, reins tied to a hitching post. Elias loaded her trunk without being asked. Clara reached for the carpet bag, but he gently took it from her grip and tossed it in back. He offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His palm was calloused, rough as tree bark, but steady. She climbed onto the seat, skirts catching slightly, and sat beside him, not close, not far, just at. Beside, Elias climbed up, took the reins, and said, "Road's rough in places. You might want to hold on." Clara exhaled slow and long. The wagon jerked forward, wheels creaking as it left the station and the watching eyes behind. No one called after them. No one stopped them. The sound of the wheels on rock and dry grass filled the silence. She didn't know what lay ahead, only that the place she'd come from had burned behind her, quietly and completely. She looked once over her shoulder at the fading outline of the station, the place where her future had ended. Then she turned her face forward, toward the unknown, toward the man who hadn't asked her to be anything but useful toward the road. She didn't know his past. He didn't ask about hers. But they rode west together, like two debts waiting to be paid. The road to Ilias's ranch was a wound cut through the landred, cracked and stubborn. The wagon jostled with every rut, and the wind carried the dry, metallic scent of mesquite and old ash. Clara held onto the edge of the seat, her gloved fingers aching with tension, though she tried not to show it. Neither of them spoke for miles. She watched him from the corner of her eye, the way his jaw tensed whenever the wheel dipped too deep. How he leaned ever so slightly to the right, likely to ease the pressure on his injured leg, His movements were deliberate, careful, like someone used to pain, used to doing things alone. Clara didn't ask questions. She had enough. Of her own? Instead, she let the silence stretch. Let the land fill it. The further they drove from town, the more Quemato faded behind them, not just in distance, but in feeling. It was strange how quickly a place could feel like a memory you didn't want to keep. The sun sank low, and long shadows slid across. The sagebrush like ink spilled slowly across a page. Finally, Elias broke the quiet. "You ever worked a ranch before?" "No," she said. "But I learned fast. You'd have too." He didn't say it unkindly. Just a fact, dropped like a stone into still water. Clara watched the sky turn molten orange over the jagged edge of the hills. "What kind of work are we talking?" "Cleaning, cooking, feeding animals, some sewing, if you're decent with a needle." He paused, glanced her way. "And solitude, that is work too." She let out a faint breath, not quite a laugh. "That part I'm already trained for?" Gave a soft grunt agreement or approval. She couldn't tell. When the house finally came into view, it was smaller than she expected. Just one main structure and a lean-to barn off to the side. The wood. Siding was weathered and grayed, shingles missing from the roof like teeth knocked out in a fight, but it stood upright. Clara took in the crooked porch swing, the stack of wood leaning against the wall, the cracked window patched with oilcloth. It wasn't broken, it was waiting. Elias brought the wagon to a stop. "I'll get your trunk later," he said. "Bags enough for now." She climbed down carefully, stretching stiff legs. The air was cooler here. Higher, quieter. So quiet, she could hear the wind slipping between the cracks in the house. He opened the door and stepped aside for her to enter first. Inside, the house smelled of cedar smoke and something deeper dust. Age, the kind of stillness that comes from grief unspoken. The main room was a wide open space with a hearth at one end, a simple wooden table in the middle, 2 chairs, and a long counter cluttered with tools, jars, and a stack of worn letters tied with twine. Elias followed her in and pointed to a narrow hallway. "Room at the back's yours." It was the storeroom. "I cleared it out best I could." "Thank you," she said quietly. He didn't reply, just turned and began lighting. A lantern. The light flickered against the walls, revealing corners layered in years of quiet. "Kitchen's here," he said, gesturing toward a modest space by the window. "Water pump S outside. You'll have to heat it." Wood piles to the left. Clara nodded, absorbing the rhythm of this life he was offering. Not kindness, not charity, a trade. Her presence for his peace. Labor for shelter. She stepped toward the hallway, but paused, fingers brushing the frame. "I'll start with the hearth," she said. "House should be warm before night settles." Elias met her eyes. And for the first time, something shifted in his expression, softer, but guarded. "Suit yourself." She set down her bag and began gathering what she needed. Flint, wood, patience. She knelt by the cold fireplace and worked with the calm of someone who'd had to start from nothing before. The flame caught on the 3rd strike, flaring up with a little roar before settling into a slow burn. Elias leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You make fire like someone who's been alone a while." "I've been a lot of things," Clara said. "Alone just lasted the longest." He didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. When she stood, she dusted off her skirt and faced him. "Anything else you want to tell me before I sleep?" Elias looked at her for a moment, then said, "I don't like noise. Don't like questions. I don't explain myself much." "That's fine," she said. "I didn't come here to be answered." He nodded once and turned away. She heard the porch door creak, then click shut. And she was alone again. But not quite in the same way. Clara made her way down the hall to her room. The door stuck, but she pushed it open with a shoulder. The room was small, windowless, with a narrow bed and a rough-hewn dresser. The sheets were clean. A cup sat on the washstand, and the floor didn't creak. She sat on the edge of the bed and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Not a home, not yet, but not a cage either. The quiet pressed in from every corner, but it didn't choke her. She could feel that this wasn't a place where someone would love her back into life. That was fantasy. This was something different. Stranger, maybe harder, but maybe stronger too. She looked down at her hands calloused from work, not weakness. And for the first time since the train left Philadelphia, she didn't feel like they were shaking. Later that night, when she opened her door to check the fire, she found a small cup sitting on the floor outside. It's not on a tray, not with a note, just milk, still warm. She stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. Steamed gently against her palm. No apology, no welcome, just presence. She closed the door quietly behind her. "You'll have the house," he said. "I sleep where ghosts don't knock." The morning came slow, stretching across the plains like a second chance. Clara woke before the light reached her windowless room. The house was cold, the kind of cold that settled in your joints, and whispered doubt into your bones, but the silence was soft, not cruel. She dressed quickly, washed with water from the pitcher that had gone cool overnight, and folded the wool blanket she'd slept under. The room was plain, but hers. For now, when she stepped into the main room, the fire from last night had burned down 2 coals. The scent of cedar still lingered in the air, mingling with something faintly metallic old wood and older memory. She knelt to feed the fire again, coaxing life back into it with dry twigs and patience. By the time the sun reached the kitchen window, the stove was warm, the kettle whistling, and the smell of brewed chicory coffee filling the space like a small defiance. She didn't know if Elias even liked coffee. The kitchen had needed a heartbeat, and she knew how to give it one. He appeared in the doorway as if conjured by the steam itself. Hat in hand, shirt collar damp with morning dew, he stood for a long moment before speaking. "You wake earlier than I do." "I had a head start," Clara said. "Didn't T sleep much?" Elias nodded, glanced at the kettle, then walked to the table. He didn't sit, but rested his hands on the back of one chair. "Don't have to do this," he said. "This wasn't part of the arrangement." "I need to move," Clara replied, pouring him a cup.
Ow!
"If I sit too long, I remember things I'd rather not." He accepted the coffee, held it without drinking. "Most people come here to forget. It's just another way of remembering," she said, and took a sip of her own. The moment settled between them, spare but not empty. Breakfast, Elias gave her a quiet tour of the property. The barn was sturdy but underused. 3 goats, 1 mule. Stubborn hen named Agatha, who pecked Clara's boot like she was defending something sacred. Elias chuckled in. Unexpected, low sound that made her pause. "You don't laugh much," she said, brushing straw from her skirts. "Not much to laugh about," he replied, though a ghost of that sound still hung around him like dust caught in sunlight. They walked the perimeter of the house, past a weathered fence with missing rails and a patch of ground where nothing grew. Clara noticed a rusted horseshoe nailed to the wall beside the door. "Lucky charm?" she asked. "Reminders," Elias said. "Which way not to go back?" She nodded. She understood that kind of compass. Inside, Clara began her true work. The house wasn't filthy, just forgotten. It didn't smell of rot or neglect. It smelled like time, like a place no one had lived in, only passed through even while staying. She started in the main room, wiping down windows, shaking dust from old curtains, pulling cobwebs from corners. Behind one shelf, she found a child's wooden toya, small hand-carved horse with one leg broken. She didn't ask. Instead, she placed it back gently, facing outward. She moved on to the bedroom next to hers. The door was closed, but not locked. She pushed it open slowly. The air inside was still, as if sound had been banished from the space. A small bed sat under the window, covered in a faded quilt. There was a cracked mirror on the wall, and a Bible on the nightstand. Dried flowers and a jar-long dead stood vigil over everything. She didn't enter fully, just looked. Grief lived here. It wasn't loud, it was not dramatic, but it clung to the corners like a shadow that refused to leave. Pulled the door shut without a sound. Later, she scrubbed the floors, humming softly under her breath. Not a song, just something to keep the silence from growing teeth. Elias passed through once or twice, each time pausing as if to say something, then thinking better of it. At dusk, when the sky turned bruised purple and the air smelled of pine smoke, Clara stood on the porch and watched the light drain from the world. The fence line cut a jagged silhouette across the horizon. Elias joined her, a tin mug in hand. "You worked hard today," he said. "Didn't feel like work?" "You make it feel different," he said, voice quiet. She looked at him, not sure whether to thank him or pull away. He kept his gaze on the distance. "Place has been dead a while. You stirred the bones." Clara folded her arms. What was it before? It was quiet for so long. She thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, hopeful. They stood together in that fragile twilight. Neither of them moved when the stars began to appear. When Clara turned in for the night, she found a small, repaired wooden scoop on the kitchen table, the one she'd seen cracked in the barn earlier. The break had been mended with tiny brass nails, polished smooth, sat beside a folded scrap of paper. She opened it. "I figured you'd need one that fits your hand." She smiled, the first real smile in days. Sometimes kindness is a wooden scoop that fits only your hand. The next few days settled into a rhythm, if not comfortable, then at least steady. Clara woke before dawn, lit the fire, boiled water, and made chicory coffee before Elias stepped out of his room. She swept the floors, mended torn linens, and cooked simple meals with ingredients that were plain but honest. Salt pork, beans, cornbread, sometimes dried apples, if the jar hadn't gone soft. Elias never asked her to do more. She did anyway. The rooms began to breathe again. Furniture shifted to better light. Windows wiped clear. Doors that had stayed closed for years opened to let air move through memory. The house remained. Quiet, but it no longer felt sealed shut. On the fourth morning, Clara stood by the stove, sleeves rolled, fingers dusted with flour. She was kneading dough when Elias walked in, his boots softer on the floor than she expected from someone. His size. He watched her for a moment, then spoke. "You don't waste time." She looked up. Idle hands make ghosts. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. "You need anything from town?" he asked. "Not unless they sell second. Chances and new names," Clara replied, pressing the dough flat. "But I hear the market's thin on that."
Pat!
He grunted his version of a laugh. "I'll be back by sundown," he said, pulling on his coat. "If I'm not, don't come looking." Clara turned fully toward him. "Is it dangerous?" "It's town," he said. "That is dangerous enough," she wanted to ask more, where he went, what he did, why the thought of seeing people made his jaw tighten, but she bit it back. Questions were a form of ownership, and neither of them had that right. After he left, Clara walked the perimeter of the house. The wind tugged at her sleeves like a child needing attention. Sagebrush bent low in the distance, whispering their secrets to no one. It felt like the land knew how to carry silence, better than most people. Behind the house was a small shed. She hadn't been inside yet. The door groaned when she opened it. Dust hung in the air like it had been waiting. Inside were tools, some sharp, some rusted old hinges, nails, strips of leather, and a sewing machine that had seen better decades. She spotted jars of dried herbs on a shelf, each labeled in handwriting that looked careful, not Elias's. She touched one jar, lavender. She thought, and a wave of something unnameable rolled over her.
Not grief.
Not exactly. But the weight of someone else's life, left in pause. Back in the house, she pulled water from the pump and scrubbed the kitchen floor, humming quietly to herself. The mop moved like muscle memory, her body remembering a time when she'd cleaned for strangers just to afford a bed for the night. Was different. No one was watching. No one was scoring her. She just wanted the house to feel less like waiting. By late afternoon, she opened the front door to sweep out dust and found a bird feather tucked into the edge of the porch lawn. Striped from a hawk, maybe. She ran her thumb along the shaft and tucked it behind her ear. The wind shifted. The hairs on her arms rose. And then she saw her a woman, standing about 30 yards off the porch, still as stone. Her dark braid hung over one shoulder, wrapped in leather, tan shawl draped over her shoulders. Her eyes, even from this distance, held no fear. Clara stepped down off the porch slowly. "Hello?" she called. The woman didn't move. Clara tried again, softer this time. "Do you need something?" A pause. Then the woman replied, her voice low and even. "You're not the first to try fixing this place." Clara stopped. The words weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. They were honest. Bone. Deep, honest. "I'm not trying to fix anything," Clara said. "Just clean. You clean a wound too much, it opens again," the woman said. They stood in silence. The wind pressed against them like breath. "Name's Lucinda," the woman said finally. "Lucinda Bluebird." Clara Whitfield. Lucinda nodded once, then stepped forward. Up close, she smelled of pine and smoke. Her eyes were sharp, but not judging, just aware. "You, his woman?" Clara stiffened. "No, I work here." "Ah, nah," Lucinda murmured. "That's what the last one said." Clara's throat dried. She opened her mouth to ask, but Lucinda beat her to it. "She left in winter. Didn't T leave tracks?" Pause. "Some say she went east. Others say she's bones under the shed." Clara didn't T flinch. Not quite. Lucinda tilted her head. "You scared?" "Of what?" Clara asked. "A man who won't touch me? A town that already hates me? Or a ghost that doesn't knock?" Lucinda cracked the barest smile. "You got iron under that skin." "I've had to," Clara said. Lucinda looked past her, toward the house. "He's got his reasons," she said. "But that doesn't mean they won't cut you too." "I don't plan to bleed for someone else's sorrow," Clara said. Lucinda gave a small nod of approval. "I live north, near the creek. If you need things, the general store don't sell medicine, stitching, TI trade, honest." "Thank you," Clara said, truly meaning it. Lucinda turned to leave, but paused. "You stir the bones right. They don't stay dead." Then she walked off into the wind, vanishing like she'd never been there. That night, Elias returned. As the stars were pricking holes in the dark, he said nothing about the trip, just placed a small sack of flour and a wrapped bundle of cloth on the table. "For you," he said. "What is it?" "Apron," he said. "Your old one's got more holes than cloth." She opened the bundle. It was plain stitched by hand likely his. The seams were uneven, the fabric stiff. It was clean, honest. "I met someone today," Clara said. Lucinda Bluebird. Elias froze mid-step. "She brought me no trouble," Clara added quickly. "She won't," he said, his voice unreadable. "But she doesn't. Talk to strangers." Clara tied the apron around her waist. "Guess I'm not one anymore." He nodded once, but his eyes lingered on her just a second too long before he turned and walked out back. She watched him go, the feather still tucked behind her ear. "This land eats the soft-hearted," Lucinda said. "Lest you grow thorns." The next week passed like the slow unrolling of a bandage every day, peeling back another layer neither of them had meant to show. Clara fell deeper into the rhythm of the ranch. She'd learned the creaks of each floorboard, the way the stove coughed before catching, the exact pressure needed on the pump handle to keep it from jamming. She scrubbed years off the walls, pulled nails from windowsills, even restitched. The torn curtain in the bedroom, she never entered again. She didn't ask Elias about it, and he never offered. There were doors between them still, some made of wood, some not. Elias, true to form, stayed a man of few words. He repaired fences by day, hunted rabbits by dusk, and whittled in the evenings by lantern light. His presence had grown less like a wall and more like a shadow constant, watchful but no longer cold. One morning, Clara opened the front door to shake out a rug and nearly tripped over a bundle left on the porch. Wrapped in deer hide and tied with string, the package was small, precise. She crouched down, undid the knot, and peeled it open. Inside was a tight bundle of herbs, yarrow, mullein, and blue sage, bound neatly with corn husk. Nestled. On top was a sliver of bone carved with a symbol she didn't recognize, and a note written in careful block letters, "For healing." Or holding, depending on the wound, LB. Clara held the bundle for a long time, breathing in its quiet strength. That afternoon, she walked to the shed and cleaned out the space entirely. She set up a second table there, cleared the windows, and laid out the herbs like old letters. She hung the feather Lucinda had gifted her over the door, let the dust swirl and settle again. When Elias saw her walking back to the house with dirt on her hands and determination in her eyes, he just gave her a slight nod. No questions, no refusals. The next day, Lucinda came in person. This time she didn't linger at the edge of the clearing. She stepped right onto the porch, leaned a palm against the frame, and knocked once slow, deliberate. Clara answered with a quiet smile. Lucinda looked her over. You hung the feather I did? Didn't burn the herbs? No. Lucinda stepped inside. Then we talk. They sat at the kitchen table, the two women across from each other with a pot of strong tea between them. Elias had gone to town that morning and wasn't expected back until evening. Clara poured the tea. Lucinda took hers without sugar. Tell me about this place, Clara asked softly. Lucinda glanced toward the front room. This house is honest. Doesn't hide its ghosts, that is rare. Clara sipped her tea. Did you know her? Not well. She was like winter quiet, beautiful, hard to survive. She kept to herself. Didn't last long after the child. Clara's fingers tightened around her cup. There was a child? Lucinda nodded. A daughter. Born small. Sick lungs. Gone by spring and Elias. Lucinda tilted her head. He buried more than a grave. He buried sound. They sat in silence for a moment. I'm not here to replace anyone, Clara said.
Ow.
Lucinda's eyes gleamed with something like respect, then Dante. Be something else. Clara looked up. What then? A woman with her own name, Lucinda said. Not someone else's shadow. That afternoon, Clara took down the thin curtains in the kitchen and replaced them with ones she'd stitched herself. They were plain just muslin, but they were hers. She moved the kitchen table. To catch more sunlight, rearranged the pantry shelves. Reclaimed a corner of the house no one had dared touch. That night, after Elias returned, he stood in the doorway staring at the changes. He didn't speak for a while. Finally, he said, Looks different. It needed light. Clara answered, her back still to him as she sliced apples. He didn't argue. Instead, he set something on the counter, a tin box, square, worn smooth at the corners. For the shed, he said, tools. For the herbs. Clara turned to him. You okay with that? It's your work now, he said. I don't own it. Their eyes met. Something passed between them, wordless but heavy. You ever gonna ask me why I came here? Clara asked suddenly. Elias took a breath, slow. You want me to? No, she said. But I want you to wonder. That made him pause, I do. Outside, wind scratched against the eaves. You're not like the others? He said. What others? The ones who left. She looked at him, eyes steady. I didn't come here to leave. Elias nodded, not yet. She walked past him then, gently brushing his arm as she passed and went to put the tin in the shed. When she came back, he was still standing there, still watching the place she'd just left. Later that night, she sat alone on the porch, arms wrapped around her knees, listening to coyotes sing the moon awake. Lucinda's voice echoed in her memory. You're not here to replace anyone. You're here because you refuse to vanish. In that moment, Clara felt it. For the first time in years, not safe, but real, grounded, present. This land would never be gentle. But maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be either. You're not here to replace anyone. You're here because you refuse to vanish. The wind came in sharp that morning, cold as a warning. It howled across the mesa, rattled the windows, and carried with it the kind of silence Clara had come to recognize, one thick with meaning. Storms didn't always come with rain. She was up early, kneading dough with practiced hands, the fire humming behind her. She moved quietly, her body adapting to the house as if it had lived there longer than she had. Elias hadn't come in from the barn yet. Though she knew he'd been up since before the sun cracked the sky, he always was. When he finally stepped through the back door, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a bueno, more than 12 slim sharp, with dust in his hair and a knife on his belt that looked too big for his hands. His boots were cracked, his coat several winters too small. Clara froze with her hands in flour. Is Tavo Elias said simply, as if introducing a stray coyote. He'll be staying on for a while. Tavo's dark eyes flicked to hers, guarded, suspicious. He didn't T-speak. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and nodded. You hungry? The boy hesitated. Then, a sharp nod. She gestured to the table. Sit, I'll fix you something. Tavo moved like someone who didn't trust Charoslow, ready to bolt. He sat on the edge, eyes scanning the room, not touching anything. Elias stepped aside, letting Clara lead. While she fried bacon and stirred eggs, she listened to the silent stretch between them. The boy didn't ask questions, but he didn't look away either. His gaze tracked her hands, the rhythm of her work, the way she poured coffee like it was a ritual. When she set a plate in front of him, he didn't thank her. She started eating fast but careful, like he didn't know if the food might be taken back mid-bite. Elias leaned against the doorframe. He was walking south of town, no pack. Said he's headed to Silver City. Clara glanced at the boy. That is a long walk. Tavo. Didn't he respond? Elias continued. Didn't say much else. But I figured if he was going to freeze to death on my land, I'd at least make sure he didn't do it hungry. Clara studied the boy. You got people in Silver City? Tavo stared at his plate. No, then why go there? Silence. Elias didn't push, and neither did she. When breakfast was over, Tavo took his plate to the sink without being asked. He didn't smile, didn't linger. But something shifted in the air, a new thread in the weave. Later that day, Clara found Tavo sitting behind the shed, whittling a stick with that too big knife. She didn't approach, just watched from the porch as the boy carved the wood down to a point, then tossed it into a pile of others, each one sharp, useless, discarded. She brought him water, left it beside him without a word. That night, the house felt different. 3 chairs now, 3 plates, 3 silences. Tavo slept in the small back room Elias had cleared out while Clara boiled sheets and beat dust from the mattress. It had been years since anyone lived in that room, maybe longer since a child did. Before bed, Clara stood outside under a sky thick with stars and thought about the boy. About what it meant for Elias to bring him here. About the line. Between taking someone in and saving them? When Elias joined her on the porch, he didn't speak at first. Just leaned against the railing, eyes scanning the dark. You think I'm wrong? He asked finally. No, Clara said. But I think you're hoping for something you won't say out loud. Elias' jaw tightened. He reminds me of someone her. He nodded once. She was about his age. Same look in the eyes. Like the world owed her nothing, and she planned to collect anyway. Clara turned to him. What happened to her? I buried her father, Elias said, but not her. Silence settled heavy between them. She disappeared? Clara asked. No, he said. She left. I let her. And now, he didn't answer. Clara looked toward the house, where the faint glow of lamplight slipped through the window like a secret. You think bringing in a stranger balances the scale? She asked. Ilias's voice was low. Think the scale broke a long time ago. They stood there until the cold bit through their coats. Then Elias turned in. Clara stayed a little longer, staring at the stars until they blurred. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of boots on wood. Tavo was already outside, chopping, kindling with focus far beyond his ears. Sweat clung to his brow, despite the chill. Clara stepped onto the porch. You don't have to do that. Didn't he stop? I don't like owing people. She crossed her arms. No one's keeping a tally, he paused. Looked at her for the first time with something like curiosity. Why are you here? He asked. Clara smiled, small and sad. Because nowhere else wanted me. Tavo nodded. Yeah, I know that place. They stood in the wind, 2 people from different maps of sorrow, recognizing the same terrain. That evening, after dinner, Elias pulled Clara aside. He asked to stay, he said. Clara raised her brows. You gonna let him? Elias nodded, for now. She looked at him closely. You still think you're just patching up old sins? Elias didn't look away. I think sometimes what we save, saves us. Later, when she passed by the boy's room, The door was cracked open. Inside, Tavo sat on the bed, holding the feather Clara had once tucked behind her ear. Now tied to the handle of his knife, he didn't see her. He didn't need to. She kept walking. Sometimes what we save saves us. The frost came in hard that week. It's not gentle like dew, but sharp, stubborn, and loud in its silence. The ground cracked under boots by morning, the animals huddled tighter in the barn, and the windows wept condensation that froze into delicate lace by dawn. Clara pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped outside with the morning pail. Breath clouded in front of her like smoke. Inside, Tavo was mending a leather strap at the kitchen table. Elise was already out at the far end of the fence line. She'd watched him ride out just after sunrise. A single figure against the frozen pale gold of the hills. She liked the cold in a way. It cleared her head, made things honest. But honesty came with ghosts. The longer she stayed, the more Clara felt them pressing through the floorboards. Brushing along the backs of her arms in the hall, whispering in the way the wind curved around the porch at night. Not loud, not cruel, just present. Memory lived here, and it didn't plan to leave. Inside, the fire crackled warm, and Tavo hardly looked up as she stepped in. "Something's coming," he said flatly. Clara paused, brushing snow off her sleeves. "Storm." He shook his head. "Not that kind." She studied him, surprised by the weight in his voice. Tavo didn't speak like other boys. He spoke like someone who'd watched his own name get written in someone else's blood. "What do you mean?" she asked. But he didn't answer, just returned to his stitching. By mid-afternoon, Elias still hadn't returned. The sun sagged lower behind the trees, bleeding through the branches like spilled oil. Clara kept busy kneading bread, checking on the goats, splitting firewood, anything to silence the feeling, clawing up the back of her ribs. By dusk, she was pacing the porch, arms crossed, eyes on the road. When the horse finally appeared on the rise, her breath caught. But it wasn't Elias. It was someone else, a rider in a long duster. Dark hat pulled low, the shape of a rifle strapped to his back. Behind him rode another man, then another. 3 in total. All strangers. They didn't T-rush. They approached slow, like they already owned the place. Clara stepped back into the house. "Tavo," she said sharply. He was at the door before she finished. The rack checked the shells. Her hands were steady. Years in Philadelphia hadn't made her soft. "Go out the back," she said. "I'm not hiding," Tavo replied. "They might not be after you, and if they are..." They stared at each other. Neither flinched. Then Clara nodded. "Stay close." By the time the riders reached the porch, she was standing in the doorway, the shotgun resting against her hip, her stance calm. The lead rider dismounted, tipped his hat. "Evenin', ma, am." "Aye." She said nothing. He smiled, revealing a gold tooth and a scar that twisted the left side of his mouth. "We're looking for Elias Yazzie, man said to be living here. That name ring any bells?" Clara held his gaze. "It's not here." "Shame. We go back a ways, old business." "What kind of business?" The man stepped closer, boot on the bottom porch step, the kind that doesn't forget. Or forgive. Clara didn't blink. "This is my house, my land. You're not welcome here." The man chuckled. "Didn't say I was asking." Behind her, she heard Tavo shift a soft breath. The creak of a floorboard. The man's. Eyes slid past her shoulder. "You take in strays now, huh?" he said, fitting. Clara raised the shotgun, just enough to be understood. Turn around. The man didn't move. His smile didn't fade. But something in his eyes changed, curious now, not mocking. Then he stepped back, lifted his hands slightly. "Didn't mean to rile you," he said, "just passing through." He mounted again, easy as breath. "We'll be back," he called over his shoulder. "Not tell your man he owes. A grave, and we aim to collect." They rode off into the cold, the wind swallowing the sound of hooves until nothing remained but the taste of threat in the air. Inside, Clara leaned the shotgun against the wall and exhaled. Tavo stood by the table, his fists clenched tight. "Who were they?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. "Too fast, try again." "I don't know exactly, but I know the kind." She didn't push further. Not yet. When Elias returned that night, he looked older, weathered. His shoulders carried a silence that made the room colder than the frost outside. "They came," Clara said. "I know," Elias replied. "Saw their tracks on the ridge?" "Why?" "Didn't you come home sooner?" "'Cause I needed to think about what I was bringing back with me." She crossed her arms. "You know them?" "I knew the one in front, Seth Quill. We ran in the same outfit a long time ago. Before this place. Before everything." "What does he want, blood?" Elias said, "or dead? And sometimes they're the same." Tavo spoke then, voice low. "You said this was a quiet place." Elias turned toward him. It was. Clara stepped between them. "We don't have time for riddles. If you brought war here, we need to know what we're standing." The current voice does not support reply language. Elias' jaw tensed. "I left them behind. Thought they'd stay there." Clara stared hard. "You know they won't." He looked away. "I know." That night no one slept much. Elias kept to the porch, rifle across his lap. Tavo curled by the fire with his knife clutched under the blanket. Clara sat at the kitchen table, the kettle warm but untouched, her eyes wide open, waiting for the cost to catch up, waiting for the past to demand payment. And in the dark she whispered something not even the wind could carry away. "Peace doesn't come to people like us. We have to make it bleed first." The following days passed under a tension too quiet to name, like a wire pulled taut between them and the horizon, humming with what hadn't yet happened, but surely would. Clara moved through the house, with more purpose, but less ease. Every corner felt like it might hold an answer or a threat. Elias spent most of his time outdoors, fixing the fences that didn't need fixing. Tavo followed him sometimes, mostly in silence, but watched. Everything. The boy was sharp, quiet, quick with his hands and quicker with his eyes. He didn't ask questions. He read them off people's backs. Clara didn't sleep much. Her dreams, when they came, were tangled things. Boot tracks through. Blood, voices, shouting over wind, her own hands buried in soil that whispered, "It's always the same phrase. This land remembers everything you try to bury." One morning, Lucinda arrived without warning, like a shadow slipping between worlds, her braids swaying behind her, her coat stitched with deer hide. Clara was on the porch peeling apples, and she looked up just as Lucinda stepped into view. "You feel it, don't you?" Lucinda said without greeting. Clara nodded slowly. "They'll be back." Lucinda leaned against the railing. "They always are." Clara paused, knife still in hand. "Did you know about Seth Quill?" Lucinda's eyes narrowed. "Knew his brother, the one Elias buried." "You think they'll come with talk or bullets?" Lucinda didn't answer right away. "Depends how much grief they're riding with." "I'm guessing more than their horses can carry," Clara muttered. Lucinda took one of the apple slices from the bowl and bit into it, chewing thoughtfully. "I brought something," she said, reaching into the folds of her coat. She pulled out a small leather pouch, worn and tied with bone bead strings. "What is it?" Clara asked. "Protection of a kind." Clara raised a brow. "You believe in that?" Lucinda shrugged. "Doesn't matter if I do. It matters if they do. And if you do." Clara took the pouch. It was light, but the weight of meaning settled into her palm like a stone warmed by the sun. "You can bury it under the porch," Lucinda said, "or hang it above your bed, or burn it if you're feeling brave." Clara turned it. Over in her hands, what's in it? Things that don't forget.
Ow.
That night, she didn't burn it. She hung it over the front door. Elias noticed it first. "What's that?" he asked, boots thudding inside after his usual perimeter check. "Insurance," Clara said, wiping her hands on her apron. Elias stood under it, studying the beads, the stitching. He didn't touch it. "You believe in ghosts now?" he asked. Clara met his eyes. "I think we've both been living with them long enough." He gave a slow nod. "That is fair." Later, they sat by the fire in the main room. Tavo was asleep near the hearth, his back to the wall, hand resting on the handle of his knife, even in slumber. The wind rattled the windows, and something in the sound made Clara's stomach twist. "We need a plan," she said softly. Elias poked the fire with the iron rod, sending sparks up like startled birds. "They'll come at night. That's how Seth works. Will he bring more men? Probably. He always liked to crowd when blood was involved. Clara rubbed her arms. What did you do, Elias? He stared into the fire for a long moment. I let someone die. Someone important to him. Was it murder? No, but I didn't stop it. Didn't pull the trigger, didn't pull the man back either. That enough for revenge? Elias nodded. For men like Seth, yeah. Clara stood. Then we fortify. They worked through the next day like soldiers preparing a last stand. Clara boarded the windows in the back of the house. Elias checked the rifles, sharpened the hunting knives, and dug a trench behind the shed, a fallback if the house got breached. Tavo set traps around the perimeter, small wire snares and tripwire signals using empty cans. He didn't say much, but Clara noticed how his hands didn't shake. As the sun dropped, painting the land in hard gold silence, Clara cooked a heavy meal, beans, thick with pork fat, bread, and dried peaches rehydrated in whiskey. They ate without talking. Outside, the wind died. The land went still. Kind of stillness was never peace, it was pause, a breath before a scream. When the night reached its blackest hour, they heard it. Hooves, slow, measured, approaching from the west. Clara grabbed her shotgun. Elias stood near the front window, rifle ready. Tavo crouched low by the door, every muscle coiled. They waited. A knock, soft, almost polite. Evening, a voice called, "Don't mean to interrupt supper." Elias stepped forward. "You already did?" Seth's laugh rolled through the door. "Didn't come to talk." "Then go ahead and shoot," Elias said, loud enough to carry. "But know this, if I go down, I take at least 2 of yours with me." A pause. Then a gunshot cracked the air, splintering the frame of the door. Clara ducked, rolled across the floor, aimed through the window, and fired. Screams, hooves. More gunfire. It wasn't T-war. It was revenge made physical. Quick, brutal, personal. 2 of Seth's men fell in the yard. 1 managed to crawl behind the water trough. Tavo slipped out the back, flanking the barn with a blade in hand. Elias took a shot through the window that clipped a rider's leg, sending him tumbling. Clara's heartbeat matched the rhythm of the gunfire. She moved like she'd done this before, not because she had, but because fear had no place. Left to sit in her body, only action lasted 7 minutes. Then it was over. Seth was gone. Whether he'd run or bled into the land, no one knew for sure. The others had either fled or fallen. Elias leaned against the doorframe, bleeding from his shoulder. Clara tore part of the curtain, wrapped it tight. They didn't T-speak. Tavo stood by the porch steps, his knife red, his eyes unreadable. Lucinda arrived at dawn, wordless, and helped bury the bodies. When it was done, when the blood was washed from the steps and the sun was high enough to feel like a promise, Clara sat in the field behind the barn. Her hands still smelled like gunpowder and pine. Elias walked up behind her, slow, cautious. "You did more than survive," he said. She didn't look at him. "That's the only kind of living I've ever known." He crouched beside her. "You ever get tired of it?" She finally turned to him. "Every day, but I'm still here." "A beat," he nodded. "Me too." "I didn't survive to be silent." The blood dried faster than Clara expected, not just on the porch, where they'd scrubbed and scraped until the boards felt bare, but in her memory too. It crusted over her thoughts like a scabbly necessary, something you don't touch but also can't ignore. 3 days passed without incident. The wind returned, low and constant, brushing against the ranch like a dog that had seen too many fights. The birds sang again, careful, distant. The goats resumed their dull chewing like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Seth was gone, dead, maybe, though no body had been found. And with him, the threat that had circled them like a hawk in wide loops. But relief didn't come in the way Claire expected. There was no triumph, just a strange quiet in her chest, like a bell that had stopped ringing but left the sound behind anyway. She still dreamed of the gunfire. Not the chaos of it, but the moments between, when her breath caught, when she had to choose between standing or running. When she realized that she no longer could run, even if she wanted to. In the mornings, she checked the property, watched the fences, kept her hands busy with stitching or chopping or mending. The new tension wasn't fear, it was awareness. She'd been part of the fight now. She'd stood her ground, not just for herself, but for this place, and it hadn't swallowed her. Tavo changed too. He no longer flinched at footsteps. He no longer lingered in doorways. There was a steady gravity to him now, like someone who had been tested and found a piece of himself still intact. He started sleeping through the night, eating more, smiling just once or twice. But Clara caught it. Elias remained. Elias. He moved slower since the bullet wound, favoring his right shoulder, though he'd never admit it. Still fixed what didn't need fixing. Still kept to himself. But he sat closer at the table now. He didn't vanish into the barn without saying where he was going. And when Clara handed him a cup of coffee, his hand brushed hers and didn't pull away too fast. It was Lucinda who finally said what Clara had been thinking. "You belong here now?" she said one afternoon, after dropping off a sack of dried herbs and a pair of rabbit skins. Not just because you fought, because you stayed. Clara ran her fingers over the soft fur of the pelts. "There a difference?" Lucinda nodded. "Plenty of people fight. Not many keep planting after." They stood on the porch, watching the sun warm the yard. "Spring's coming," Lucinda said, her eyes scanning the hills. "You can feel it under your boots." Clara smiled softly. "Good. I want to grow something real this year." Lucinda studied her. "You already did." That night the fire burned steady and low. Tavo had gone to bed early, worn out from digging the new irrigation trench. Elias had finally agreed to start. Clara sat in the rocker near the stove, her hand still, the mending basket untouched at her side. Elias stood across the room, polishing the rifle barrel slowly. Not because it needed it, just because his hands needed something. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Clara asked. He didn't look up. "Where would I go? I don't me now. I mean, before. When it all got bad." He set the rag down, rested the rifle beside the wall. "I did leave. But turns out I carried everything with me." Clara leaned back in the rocker. "Some ghosts don't travel well." Elias smiled faintly. "Some follow." A long pause. "I came here to disappear," Clara said quietly. "I thought if I could just be still enough, silent, enough I'd stop being who I was." "You think it worked?" She met his eyes. "No, but I found something better." Elias moved closer, sat across from her, elbows on his knees. "I used to think this land was punishment," he said dry. "It's empty, hard." "It is," Clara said. "But it's also honest." He nodded. "And that's what makes it holy." The fire cracked between them, sending up sparks like stars that burned for half a second before vanishing. "I was married once," Clara said. Elias stilled. "Didn't he speak?" "He drank more than he worked. Told me I was too old for kindness by the time I was 30. Said no man would want a wife who bruised like fruit and talked too much." Elia's jaw tightened. "He's still alive?" "Doubt it," she said. "Last time I saw him, he was lying in a ditch outside of Scranton, bleeding from a gambling debt. I stepped over him and didn't stop. A beat. Good." Elias said simply. Clara looked into the fire. "I don't tell you that for pity. I tell you because I know what it feels like to disappear before you're dead. To be seen like a burden, a weight someone meant to carry, but never wanted." Elias's voice was low. "I never saw you that way." She turned to him. "What do you see?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, folded square of paper. "I found this yesterday," he said, handing it to her. Clara opened it. It was a sketch charcoal on old ledger paper. Rough, but delicate.
Ow.
A woman standing in the kitchen. Sleeves rolled, head tilted toward the window, light drawn across her back. "It was her. I don't draw much anymore," Elias said. But I couldn't help this one." Clara ran her fingers over the lines, her throat catching. "I thought I'd vanished," she whispered. "You didn't," Elias said. Voice steady. "You just stopped being looked at." Her eyes burned. "I see you, Clara." For a long time, she didn't speak. Then she leaned forward, resting her hand on his. I see you too. Silence between them. Was NT empty? It was full. Firelight and breath and the ache of healing. Of lives unburied. Of ground ready to grow something new. I see you, Clara. The thaw came slowly, not just in the soil, which was finally loosening after months of cold, but in the people inside the house. The hard edges of winter were softening. Real life was starting to peek through the cracks. Clara felt it first in her hands. Where they had once been calloused and clenched, now they moved softer, slower. She found herself humming as she worked. Again, small old songs. The kind her grandmother used to hum while hanging wet linens in the Pennsylvania wind. Elias was quieter these days, not from distance, but from the kind of comfort that doesn't need constant sound. He still walked the property at sunrise. But now he brought Clara back little things, a smooth stone, handful of wild mint. One time, a bird's feather white as smoke. She kept them in a jar on the windowsill. Thibaut had taken to carving more deliberately now. Not just sharp sticks and blades, animals, birds, a small horse. He left them around the house like offerings, like a child trying to say, "I'm here," without the words. They were becoming something like a family. One morning, Clara stood in the garden, what would soon be the garden hands, in the cold, damp dirt. She'd pulled the weeds by the root, tilled the soil with a hand hoe, and cleared the last of the dead stalks from the previous summer. It wasn't much, but it was honest work. Elias stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands with a rag. He watched her for a long moment before speaking. "You thinking beans or tomatoes?" She looked up and smiled. "Both, and onions. Maybe some herbs, too." "Ambitious," he said. "You build fences for a future. I plant for one." He walked toward her, knelt beside the patch of soil. "I ain't had a garden since I was a boy," he said. "Why'd you stop?" He shrugged. "I didn't think anything worth growing could survive around me." Clara looked at him. "Maybe you just needed the right season." His eyes met hers, and for a moment the air between them thickened. Then came the sound hooves, not from the road, but from the ridge. Too many to be coincidence, Clara stood. Elias was already walking toward the porch, his body stiffening like it remembered something before his mind caught up. Tavo burst from the shed, breath quick. Riders 4, maybe 5. They all turned toward the sound. This was in Tseth. It wasn't anyone they'd seen before. But trouble had a look, and this was it. A few minutes. Later, the horses appeared over the ridge riders, dressed in worn Union blues and grays. Long coats with dust up to the knees, rifles slung carelessly but close. Clara's heart thudded low in her chest. Elias muttered under his breath, "I knew this peace wouldn't last." They didn't approach like enemies, but they didn't smile either. One of the men stepped forward, tipping his hat in a slow, mocking sort of way. "You, Elias Yazzie." Elias didn't he move? Who? Asking. Name? Captain Holt. "I've got business with you, old contract." Elise's face didn't change, but Clara saw the tension build. Behind his jaw, "I've paid every debt I owe," Elias said flatly. "Not this one," Holt replied. "You served with the 18th, didn't you? New Mexico territory?" Elias crossed his arms. "That was a long time ago. Well, some of your old crew got themselves into something. It's bad something. And your name came up?" Clara stepped closer, her voice sharp. "What does that have to do with us?" Holt glanced at her, his eyes flicking with the kind of indifference soldiers carry long after war's end. "Aim this here, ain't about you. It's about an oath he broke. Or maybe one he never did." Tavo moved to Clara's side, silent as a shadow. Elias's eyes never left Holt. "I left that war behind." Holt gave a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "War's got long legs, Elias. They walk after you." Behind Holt, one of his men spit into the dust and chuckled. "We'll be back tomorrow," Holt said. "Don T be gone." Then they turned, rode off as slow as they came, dragging tension behind them like a busted saddlebag. The wind picked up again. Clara didn't speak until the last of them had vanished over the ridge. "You know what they want?" Elias nodded slowly. "They want the past." Clara met his eyes. "Then it's time we bury it for. Good war's got long legs. They walk after you." Clara stood in the yard long after the riders had gone, her hands still stained with soil, her chest a tight knot of memory and anger. She turned toward Elias, but he was already walking fast toward the barn. Not storming, not slamming, just moving with that kind of quiet that meant something inside was shaking hard enough to rattle through his bones. She followed him. Inside the barn, the air was thick with hay and silence. Elias stood by. The old trunk in the back, the one he never opened. His hands hovered above the latch. I was wondering when that box would come back to life, Clara said gently. Elias didn't look up. It should have stayed buried. But it didn't, and neither did you. He opened the trunk with a sharp breath. Inside was a weathered uniform gray-blue, moth-bitten, folded with care that said it had never been tossed away in anger. Beneath it, a journal, a few letters, a rusted badge, a Colt revolver that looked like it still remembered the weight of war. I never wanted you to see this, he said. Clara moved closer, her voice even. Why? Because this version of me, he trailed off, his hand resting on the journal, wasn't someone you'd let near your front porch, let alone your life. Then maybe it's time you let him speak. Before someone else does it for you? Elias let the words hang in the air. Then he lifted the journal and handed it to her. It's all in there, he said, why I left. They back. Clara took it, her hands steady. Outside, Tavo appeared in the doorway, face pale, voice low. They're setting up camp in the arroyo. We saw the smoke. Elias cursed under his breath. They're not leaving this time, Clara said. No, Elias replied. They're waiting for me to run. She squared her shoulders. So Dante. Elias looked at her, something old and wild behind his eyes. You think I can face what I did back then and not become him again? I think the man who buried that uniform is the same one who saved a boy, let in a woman he didn't know, and made room for both of us when he had nothing left to give. He didn't respond, but the silence felt like surrender. Stepped forward. What happens if they try to take you? Clara turned to him. They'll have to go through all of us. The boy's jaw tightened. He nodded. That night, the three of them sat at the kitchen table, a map spread. Out between them, candles flickering over worn lines and faded ink. Elias pointed. If they move in from the arroyo, they'll try to flank left. We use the rise by the old pine good cover, and we see them coming. Tavo was already sketching routes on a scrap of paper. Traps here and here. Clara refilled their mugs with coffee. Her hands no longer trembled. They weren't preparing for war. They were preparing for a reckoning. Later, after Tavo had gone to bed, Elias lingered by the doorway, the moonlight casting him in silver. I don't deserve your faith, he said softly. Clara walked to him, laid her palm against his chest, right over the place where his heart beat stubborn and true. It's not about deserve, she whispered. It's about choosing who we become, even if the world keeps calling us by our old names. He looked down at her, something breaking in his expressions, something old, wounded, but still alive. Want to choose right this time, he said. Then start here, she said. Start with us. That's about choosing who we become, even if the world keeps calling us by our old names. The morning came with a strange kind of calm. Gray skies, flat wind, the stillness of animals sensing something humans only feel in their bones. The sort of quiet that settles in right before a break in the earth, before something either grows or burns. Elias stood alone at the edge of the garden, his rifle slung across his back, the air raw on his skin. He'd woken before the others, though he doubted anyone had really slept. There'd been too much waiting in the walls of that house, too many words left unsaid, too many sins rising up like dust in sunlight. Clara stepped onto the porch a few minutes later, mug in hand, hair still braided from the night before. They moved, she said quietly. Tavo counted 6 tenths now. Elias turned to her, eyes sharp. That means more men. She nodded, and they're not hiding anymore. Fires visible all the way from the top ridge. They want us to know they're serious. No, Clara said. They want you to remember. He looked away. Never. Forgot. Inside, Tavo was carving again. This time, a hawk, its wings wide, its eyes focused. He wasn't whittling to pass time, he was grounding himself. Preparing by noon, Lucinda arrived. She rode in fast, not bothering to tie up her horse before she stepped down, boots hitting the earth like war drums. Her braid was wrapped, tighter than usual. Round her neck, a silver medallion caught the light. "They're not just soldiers," she said as soon as she stepped into the house. "At least not anymore." Lias leaned forward over the kitchen table. "What are they, mercenaries?" "Men who stayed behind after the war, wandered with their guilt and drank it down until they needed something worse to feel alive." Again, Clara crossed her arms. "And they think Elias is one of them." Lucinda gave Elias a long look. Maybe he was once. Elias didn't he argue. Lucinda unrolled a canvas bundle onto the table knives, flint black. Powder, 2 small bundles of sage wrapped in red twine. "Protection," she said, "from the living and the dead." Clara stared at the weapons. "You think this ends in talk?" Lucinda's eyes were hard. If it were going to end in peace, they'd have come without guns. Elias touched one of the knives, its edge gleaming. "I swore I'd never wear blood on my hands again." "Then don't," Lucinda said. "Put it on theirs." Outside, the wind picked up. Tavo stood at the window, watching the distant rise. They removing. Everyone turned to look. A dust trail in the distance, horses. A slow, steady approach. "They're testing the line," Elias muttered, "seeing if we'll meet them or hide behind the house." We turned to Tavo. "Take the east side. Set the trip lines. If they try to flank, we'll know before they do." To Clara, "You're with me." "We hold the front." Clara nodded. No hesitation. Lucinda didn't wait for instruction. She headed straight for the barn where she'd stashed extra ammunition weeks ago, ways planning for the thing they all pretended wouldn't come. As they took their positions, something strange settled over Clara. Not fear, not even anticipation, just resolve. The kind that comes when you've already been broken once, and there's nothing left to shatter but the lies. The first shot came from the ridge, struck the fence post, splintering wood and sending a hawk screeching from the nearby tree. Then everything was motion. Elias returned fire. Clara ducked low, scanning the ridge. She saw at least 3 riders, maybe 4, silhouettes backlit by a gray sun. Tavo's trap snapped somewhere in the brush. One of the riders screamed. Lucinda fired from the barn, precise, sharp. Lias called out positions. But it was Clara who held the front line. Her shotgun barked twice, dropping one rider who got too close. The rest pulled back, but it wasn't retreat. It was regrouping. "They're waiting for night," Elias muttered. "They think we'll tire first." "They're wrong," Clara snapped. As dusk fell, they pulled the wounded man into the barn of the mercenaries, who hadn't died fast enough. His leg was torn up from the trap. He spat blood and hate as they tied his hands. Clara knelt beside him. "Why are you here? Why Elias?" The man glared. "Because he made a promise and left us to rot." Lias appeared behind her. "I kept my oath." The man laughed. "Bitter to who?" "The dead." "To the ones worth keeping it for," Elias said. "Right." The man's breath rattled. "You can kill me. But there's more coming. Not just Holt. You made ghosts, Yazzie. Now they're wearing faces." Clara stood. "Then we'll bury them again." They locked the man in the cellar, kept guard through the night. In the early hours, as the cold bit into their fingers and the fire hissed low, Elias sat beside Clara on the porch. His voice cracked when he spoke. "I remember the first man I killed. He was young, too young, didn't even have shoes." Clara didn't interrupt. "I didn't know his name, just knew he stood on the wrong side of the creek that day. And after it was done, I looked down at his face and realized something broke in me, something I wouldn't get back." "You still remember his face?" Elias nodded. "Every time I close my eyes." She reached over, touched his knee. "Then remember mine too. So it's not the last thing you see." He smiled, faint. "That's the first good trade I've ever made." The wind shifted again, smelled like smoke. Trouble wasn't, tea finished. But neither were they. "You made ghosts, Yazzie. Now they're wearing faces." The next morning, frost kissed the ground, but the sky above was a raw blue, stretched thin and sharp like a blade. The light came without warmth, and Clara felt it first in her bones, That sense of narrowing time, like a clock ticking faster and louder. They ate breakfast standing up. No one said it out loud, but no one sat either. Even Tavo, who usually hovered by the hearth with his cup, kept near the doorway, eyes flicking to the window every few seconds. He's not coming for talk this time, Elias said as he loaded rounds into a rifle. Holt made his threat. Now he's going to cash it in. Clara stood across from him, wiping down the shotgun barrel slowly. Then we make it cost him. Lucinda arrived with the sun barely cleared. Her horse was lathered, and her braid was wind-thrashed. They've doubled, she said without dismounting. 9, maybe 10. Most camped on the far slope by the stream. They've got rifles, good ones. I saw a scope. Tavo spat into the dirt. Cowards. They're waiting for you to flinch, Lucinda added, looking straight at Elias. I won't, Elias said flatly. Clara turned to the group. Then we don't scatter, we pull them in. Use the house, the land. If this is the last fight, we make it ours. There was a silence, sharp, thin, brave. Then Lucinda dismounted and tied her horse without a word. She'll de-stay. They prepared all day. Tavo rigged oil cans with flint triggers at the corners of the barn. Clara laid fresh powder lines along the path leading from the arroyo. Lucinda and Elias worked in tandem, quiet, efficient, a rhythm between them forged from old wounds and mutual trust. By dusk, everything was set. They sat around the kitchen table. No one ate much. Elias pulled out the journal he hadn't touched in years, laid it on the table. Everything I was, he said, voice low. It's in here. If I die tonight, burn it. I don't want that part of me surviving. Clara stared at the worn leather. I want to read it. But not tonight. Tonight, I need the man in front of me, not the one in those pages. Elias looked up and nodded. Tavo stood, nervous energy crackling from him like static. I'll take the barn best sightline. I'll be on the porch, Lucinda said. Elias looked at Clara. You sure? She picked up her shotgun, snapped it closed. We fight together. We finish together. The first shot came. It was after midnight. Cracked from the ridge, followed by the hiss of a bullet that barely missed the front post. Then came the fire. The oil can behind the barn ignited, lighting up the dark like a torch from hell. It screamed blue and gold into the sky. Tavo fired. Hit someone. Clara heard the thud, the shout. Then the yard became war. Gunfire. Echoed off the hills, horses screamed, men shouted commands that blurred into the wind. The smell of black powder filled the air, sharp and metallic. Elias took down 2 at the west gate. Clara clipped one, trying to circle toward the porch. Lucinda was a phantom moving through the shadows, firing from behind the chicken coop, then disappearing again. But the men kept coming. One broke into the barn. Tavo met him head-on. The fight was short, vicious. Tavo came out limping, blood on his shirt, but alive. Clara caught Elias reloading behind the water trough. His hands were shaking. Good, she called out. Yeah, he shouted back, wiping blood from his brow. But they're trying to draw us out. He was right. The shots slowed. The noise died. Then Holt stepped into the clearing alone. No hat, rifle down. Just him and his voice. Elias Yazzie, he called out. I ain't here to kill you, not tonight. Clara from the porch felt her blood freeze. Da 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 da. What's he playing at? Lucinda hissed. Elias stood slowly, walked out into the yard, rifle lowered, but not gone. I'm here, he called. Holt took another step. His face was worn now, no triumph in it, just bone deep tired. We followed the wrong man back then, Holt said. You walked away and we thought you were the traitor. But we were the fools. Elias stood silent. Holt's voice cracked, but truth, don't erase blood. Don't bring back the ones we lost. No, Elias said. But neither will more killing. You think you can buy peace with silence? Holt asked. No, Elias said, but I can bury it with forgiveness. Another pause. Then Holt dropped to one knee, set his rifle down. I came here to kill you, he said. But now I don't know why I carried that fire this far. Elias walked toward him, slow. You burn long enough, you forget how to be warm. He said. They stood facing each other. And then Holt looked past him at the firelight in the windows, at Clara on the porch, Tavo leaning on the rail, Lucinda reloading without breaking her gaze. He nodded once. This land. She don't forget, he said. Elias looked at the blackened soil, the blood, the ashes. No, he whispered. But maybe she forgives. Holt turned, walked away without his rifle. A rest. Of his men followed, silent, tired, broken open by a truth too long buried. Clara walked to Elias, took his hand. You did it, she said. He shook his head. No, we did. You burn long enough, you forget how to be warm. The morning after the standoff brought a strange kind of light, soft. Not golden, but pale, like the world had exhaled after holding its breath too long. Smoke still lingered near the barn, curling in the cold air. The scent of gunpowder clung to the porch steps, but no one moved to scrub it clean. Not yet. Clara stood in the doorway with her hands wrapped around a chipped enamel mug. The coffee had gone cold, but she hadn't noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the ridge, where Holt had vanished hours earlier. The scar of their presence was still their trampled brush, blackened earth, and silence. The kind of silence that comes after a choice. Behind her, inside the house, Elias sat at the table, sharpening a blade that didn't need sharpening. Tavo was asleep on the cot near the hearth, one arm bandaged, face relaxed in a way Clara hadn't seen in weeks. Lucinda had left just before sunrise. No goodbye, no promises, just a quiet nod and a single line. You know where to find me if the land shifts again. Clara turned as Elias entered from the back room. They're really gone? She asked. He nodded. Gone or scattered. You believe him? Holt. Elias leaned against the wall and looked out the window. I think he came to end something, and maybe he did. Clara stared down into her mug, but what now? Elias looked at her, that quiet weight in his eyes. We figure out who we are without the war chasing us. That struck something deep. So much of her life had been lived in defense dodging, bracing, hiding, and then finally fighting. But this was uncharted, not survival, not escape living. After everything, they spent the next few days fixing what had broken. Tavo mended the barn door with one good arm. Elias and Clara restrung the fences, burned what needed burning, and cleaned the cellar. The man they'd locked down there had died in. The night his body gave out before his hate did. They buried him with the others. No names, no markers, just wind and soil. That night Clara sat at the kitchen table with Elias's journal in her lap. He'd left it for her without a word, kind of trust heavier than any confession. She opened it. Inside were entries that traced years of pain, war, loyalty, guilt, but also moments of beauty. Descriptions of red dust at sunrise, of voices laughing in the mess tent, of a friend named Keegan who taught him how to whittle, and a woman in Santa Fe who gave him half a loaf of bread just because he looked tired. It wasn't the record of a soldier. It was the prayer of a man who didn't know how to forgive himself. When Elias walked in and saw her reading, he froze. I didn't write that for an audience, he said. I know, I meant to burn it. I'm glad you didn't, T. He crossed the room slowly, pulled out a chair. You were more than what you survived, Clara said, still looking down at the page. His voice was quiet. Some days, I don't feel like I survived at all. She looked up. You did? And not just by breathing. He exhaled, a long, tired thing, then nodded. Clara closed the journal, rested her hand over it. You think you can be that man again? The one who wrote this? Elias reached across the table, his hand settling over hers. I don't know, but I want to try. They sat in the soft candlelight, the fire whispering in the background, the weight between them no longer heavy, just present. Something worn together. Later, as they stepped outside, Clara looked up at the stars. The sky was clear again, deep, endless. She pointed toward the east pasture. I want to build something there. Elias followed her gaze. A barn? No, she smiled. A schoolhouse. He blinked. A school. Tavo needs it. Other kids will too. This land's got more than ghosts in it. It's got roots if we let them. Take Elias grinned. A real grin this time. And who's going to teach? Clara raised an eyebrow. Well, I can read, write, and stitch a broken arm. I figure I qualify. I'll build the walls, he said. But you have to promise not to make the kids recite poetry before breakfast. She laughed. No promises. The laughter carried over the field, light and human, like it had always belonged there. That night she couldn't sleep. Not from fear. From possibility. She sat up and wandered to the porch. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of sage and cold soil. The stars were thick above the dark trees. She closed her eyes and let it all in. Elias joined her minutes later, blanket over his shoulders. He handed her a flask. Whiskey, he said, for dreaming. She took a sip, winced, then smiled. Still tastes like fire. He looked at her. That's the point. A long silence. I used to think this land would bury me, Clara said. I think it might raise me instead. Elias's voice was rough with something deeper than age. You don't owe this place anything. Not after what it took. Clara shook her head. No, but I choose it now. He nodded slowly, then looked out at the dark. You ever wonder, he said, what it would have been like if we'd met before the damage? She thought about that, then leaned into his shoulder. Maybe we wouldn't have understood each other, she whispered. Maybe we needed the breakage to see the gold. He didn't respond, but she felt him smile. Maybe we needed the breakage to see the gold. Spring came late that year. The last frost lingered longer than usual, clinging to the roots like an old fear, unwilling to let go. But when it finally broke, it did so with quiet strength. Tiny green shoots pushed up through cracked soil. Creek began to run. Clear again. Birds returned to the cottonwoods, building nests as if nothing had ever gone wrong in the world. And the ranch, once a place of silence and survival, began to hum with the rhythm of something new. Clara stood barefoot in the garden, her palms coated in earth, planting rows of beans alongside the first sprouts of onion. Her hair was loose today, falling over her shoulders, catching the breeze that smelled of wet soil and cedar. Her face was sun-warmed, lines softer, but eyes still sharp. Elias watched from the porch steps, hands resting on his knees. He wasn't holding a weapon for once. Just a cup of coffee, steam curling into the morning light. He'd built a new fence on the east side, and the schoolhouse frame was nearly finished. Tavo had drawn the windows himself, insisting on a bigger one in the back so kids don't forget their sky. Tavo was down at the creek with Lucinda, learning how to track the spring deer. His limp had faded with time, and so had the shadows under his eyes. He carved less now and talked more. He smiled like he believed in things again. Elias took a sip from the cup and walked toward the garden. Clara looked up and grinned. You're going to wear a pathin? That porch if you keep staring, he smirked, just making sure you're not planting rocks again. That was one time twice. She tossed a clump of dirt at him, and he didn't dodge. It landed on his boot, and he left it there. Was thinking we might try corn this year, he said. Clara nodded. We've got the space. He knelt beside her, their shoulders brushing as they worked in tandem. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of roots and breath and memory. After a while, Clara leaned back, wiping sweat from her brow. I never thought I'd live to see peace, feel like work, Elias chuckled. I never thought peace would require work. They both sat quiet a moment, the kind of quiet that earns its place. You ever miss it? She asked. The road? The chaos. He thought about it, watching a hawk circle above the far trees. Sometimes, but not the way it haunted me before. I think I miss the man I was supposed to become before the war bent me out of shape. Clara didn't answer right. Away, then, maybe he's here now. Elias looked at her. Really looked. Maybe he is. Later that day, they hosted their first meal outside, an old wooden table dragged under the cottonwoods. Plates mismatched, food simple, but plentiful. Lucinda brought cured venison, Tavo roasted squash, and Clara baked bread that actually rose this time. Neighbors from farther out stopped by, Some out of curiosity, others out of something like hope. Stories were told. Fiddle was played. Someone sang a hymn in a language half the group didn't understand and no one cared. When the sun dipped low, casting everything in gold, Elias stood up and said a few words not long. Just enough. He said the land had tested them, had taken from them, had broken them. But it had also kept them, given back what it could, let them stay. He said not all scars need to fade. Some of them are just part of the map. After dinner, Clara found herself walking to the edge of the pasture alone. She stared out at the fields, the fence line, the distant ridge where once, not long ago, death had come knocking. Now, the wind carried only dust and the soft creak of barn wood settling into night. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, the quiet didn't scare her. Behind her, Elias approached, slow and steady. He didn't speak, just reached for her hand. She took it. They stood like that for a long while, side by side, facing the land. Eventually he whispered, "You ever think about what we'd have missed if we hadn't said yes?" Clara squeezed his hand. All the time. He glanced at her. "Would you change anything?" She shook her head. "Not even the worst of it, because it brought me here." They turned back toward the house, the windows warm, with lantern glow, laughter still echoing from inside. Clara stopped once more, just before they stepped through the door. "You know," she said, "for a story that started with rejection, blood, and a one-way train ticket, we didn't turn out too bad." Elias smiled, tugged her gently inside. "No," he said, "we turned out exactly right." And behind them, the door closed, not as an end, but as a beginning.